been consistent with other answers this committee has heard. That as a legal matter.
Okay, they're consistent with what every nominee has said in the rehearsed way. But you do understand that President Trump continues to deny that he lost that election and continues to assert that that election was stolen, correct?
Yeah, I want to dispute that you say these were...
Welcome back to Freedom Forge. If you believe in truth, accountability, and standing up for what's right, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe right now, because today's video is one you absolutely need to hear. Today, we're breaking down a tense Senate hearing where judicial nominees are being questioned about elections, the rule of law, and something that should be very simple, but somehow has become controversial, acknowledging who won an election. The hearing centers around whether nominees can clearly state basic facts about past elections, including the 2020 presidential race and a 2022 Senate race in Missouri. Sounds straightforward, right? Well, what we're seeing is anything but.
Thank you very much. I was watching some of the earlier questions and answers, including about the election, and I just want to follow up a little bit on that. Who won the 2022 election for the United States Senate in Missouri?
Well, I think under the 17th Amendment, the election for the United States Senate is carried out a little bit differently than the election for president. Prior to the 17th Amendment, the senators, as I recall, were chosen by state legislatures, and that was the process in this country for...
But I didn't ask for a history lesson. I'm asking who won the 2022 election for the United States Senate in Missouri.
Well, I think the history is important to explain that in the 17th Amendment, different than the 12th.
I'm going to interrupt you. Save it, okay? It might be important. But somebody ran and somebody won that election. I'm asking you who won that election.
Yeah, so pursuant to the 17th Amendment, the Missouri Secretary of State certified Eric Schmitt as the winner of the 2022 election.
Who won it?
As I just said, under the 17th Amendment, Eric Schmitt was certified and took the oath of office in January 2023.
You agree that Senator Schmitt was elected?
I agree that he took office in January 2023 and that the election was cast and counted by the Missouri Secretary of State.
You know what? I believe that Senator Schmitt won that election.
In a landslide, Senator.
Well, I wasn't going to brag about it like that. But what is so hard about saying that? You were asked by Senator Blumenthal about the 2020 election, and you could not say and won't say that Joe Biden was elected by the American people to be president, right?
I think my answers have been consistent with other answers this committee has heard. That as a legal matter.
Okay, they're consistent with what every nominee has said in the rehearsed way, but you do understand that President Trump continues to deny that he lost that election and continues to assert that that election was stolen, correct?
Yeah, I want to dispute that you say these were rehearsed or canned answers. These are my answers. These are the legally correct answers.
Okay, so you are aware that President Trump continues to assert that he won the 2020 election?
I'm aware that President Trump has a lot of views on the 2020 election.
Here's the worry here. You know, I was here on January 6th. I was here when the mob attacked, when the gun was fired, when the mob was breaking the doors down. I didn't believe it was happening. And the reason I didn't believe it was happening is because this is the United States of America, and we believe in the peaceful transfer of power. And we renounce violence as a way to overcome the decision of the American people at the polling booth. But it did happen. And you can't acknowledge that President Biden won the popular vote. You can't acknowledge that under our process, he won the election. You can't say that. I share the apprehension that Senator Blumenthal has, that the nominees who come in here can't say the obvious. You win some elections, you lose some elections. And you, as a judge, still cannot just say plainly that Biden won and Trump lost. Is that the case?
I think I want any judge to be very legally precise in what they said And I've repeatedly referred to Article 2 and to the 12th Amendment in the
Well,
process.
what you're calling legally precise, a lot of people would call politically evasive. Mr. Chairman, what is the problem with acknowledging who won the election?
I have repeatedly acknowledged that Joe Biden was certified as the president in January 2021.
But what that suggests is it was like by accident, it was by subterfuge, it was somehow illegitimate. Do you believe any of those things to be the case?
I've explained the legitimate process of the Electoral College counting their votes in December of 2020. This is when those votes were cast across the country.
Under your approach, any of us can have whatever opinion we want as to whether the election was legitimate or not. You remember that then President Trump filed, I think, like 80 lawsuits, and virtually all of them except one were thrown out of court. Was there any judicial support for your view that says that there wasn't a conclusive outcome in the 2020 presidential election?
I think the view that I've shared here today is that there was a certification process that resulted in Joe Biden being president.
Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Schiff.
Right out of the gate, the questioning gets intense. A senator asks a nominee a simple question: who won the 2022 Senate election in Missouri? And instead of just answering directly, we get this long, drawn-out explanation about constitutional amendments, historical processes, and legal frameworks. Now let me pause right there. This is exactly what frustrates a lot of Americans watching these hearings. You ask a direct question, you expect a direct answer. Instead, what you get is what sounds like a law school lecture. And look, I respect the law. I respect precision. But there's a difference between being precise and being evasive. Eventually, after being pressed multiple times, the nominee finally acknowledges that Eric Schmidt was certified and took office. But even then, it feels like pulling teeth just to get a clear answer. And that's where the concern starts to grow. Then the conversation shifts to something even bigger, the 2020 presidential election. And this is where things really heat up. The senator points out that the nominee cannot plainly say that Joe Biden won the election. Instead, the nominee keeps falling back on phrases like certified through the process or as a legal matter. Now here's my take, and I'm going to be very clear about it. As a right-leaning patriot, I believe in the Constitution. I believe in election integrity. And I also believe that clarity matters. When people in positions of power, especially judicial nominees, cannot give straightforward answers to basic questions, it shakes public confidence. But at the same time, I also understand why some conservatives are cautious here. For years now, there's been deep distrust in institutions, in media narratives, and in how elections are handled and discussed. So when nominees lean on legal precision, part of that comes from a mindset of not wanting to step into political landmines. Still, there's a line. And I think what we're seeing in this hearing is that line being tested. The senator makes a powerful point during the exchange. He talks about January 6th, about being there when chaos unfolded, and about the importance of peaceful transfer of power. That's not a small thing. That's foundational to the United States. No matter what side you're on, the idea that power transfers without violence is something we should all agree on. But here's where the clash really comes in. The senator argues that failing to clearly acknowledge election outcomes creates doubt that can lead to instability. On the other hand, the nominee insists on sticking strictly to legal language, emphasizing certification processes rather than giving a plain answer. And this is the heart of the issue. Is this about legal accuracy, or is it about avoiding political backlash? Because from a viewer's perspective, and I know many of you watching feel the same way, it starts to look like political theater on both sides. One side is pushing hard for clear statements, possibly to make a point. The other side is dodging, possibly to avoid being boxed in. But here's what I think really matters. If you're going to sit on the bench, if you're going to interpret the law, you need credibility. And credibility comes from trust. Not just legal knowledge, not just credentials, but trust. And trust comes from being able to speak plainly when it counts. Now, does that mean every nominee has to phrase things the same way? No. But when something as basic as who won an election becomes a drawn-out exchange, people start asking questions. And those questions don't just stay in the hearing room. They spread. They shape public perception. They influence how people view the justice system itself. At the end of the day, what we're seeing here is a bigger issue than just one nominee or one hearing. It's about the growing gap between institutions and the people. It's about communication, transparency, and whether those in power are willing to meet the public halfway. Because, let's be honest, most Americans aren't looking for a constitutional seminar when they ask who won an election. They're looking for a straight answer. And until that gap is addressed, hearings like this will keep feeling less like accountability and more like scripted battles. That's my take on it. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you think the nominee was being appropriately careful, or do you think this was just plain dodging the question? If you made it this far, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Freedom Forge, and stay tuned because we're going to keep breaking down moments like this. No spin, no nonsense, just real talk.